Well, it doesn't sound weird. I think one of the questions or maybe many questions, it takes the form of many questions, but something that I do
Mm-hmm.
ponder is what kind of political infrastructure would it really take for there to be a leadership that reflects what someone like myself and others, because luckily I'm inspired and pleased that I am not by myself in how I think
Mm-hmm.
about the world. Well,
Of course.
not everyone may think exactly how I think. Many people share agreements. Now, I guess the majority of people are starting to have hopes for healthcare and things like that. And also, I would say probably most people would agree that peace is better than war, even if you ask about particular questions, there may be some confusion. So I often ask, what kind of political infrastructure would it take for, even if we were to look at like a Jill Stein, who, Jill
Mm-hmm.
Stein, it was a friend. I would say that we share many different views and positions, not 100% probably, but uh, very close. And what would it take for her to gain power? Probably much more than a standard political campaign within the two-party system trying to
Yeah.
enter as a third party. What kind of movement would it take for there to be political leadership that threatened to take hold of the highest annals of power in the United States?
You are the president of the United States, so you're President Haifong. I know, it's kind of a fun thing to think about, but it is, you're just had your inauguration. It is within the first 100 days. What are three actions? It could be legislative actions, or it could be executive orders that you're taking within your first 100 days, if you could.
Wow. Well, I think first would be to end all aid to Israel. I mean, at this moment, if we're talking about today, it would be ending all aid and assistance to Israel, and then convening uh, uh, I don't even know what you would call it, but convening an emergency uh, diplomatic mission to that part of the world, and immediately gathering all the countries involved, all the forces. So, sitting with the axis of resistance and sitting with all the other countries and saying, well, what do we need to do here to repair this situation? I think that would be probably the first thing in this moment. Secondly, I mean, it's hard not to say dissolve the apparatus as it is and begin the process of instituting some kind of direct democratic structure. So, however, to elect someone like myself, it would probably take a massive social movement. So, finding ways to ensure that the political structure of the United States involves, matches, and has those forces
Mhm.
be the who's in charge, whatever
Yeah.
that is. I don't know what that would look like, but probably then immediately doing that and creating a program that then addresses some fundamental questions. I
Mhm.
think we're gonna one. If I am president, there's probably a literal civil war. So the ruling class is probably out of control. They're probably trying to stage a coup. They're probably trying to destroy the movements that brought someone like myself to power. So immediately after empowering the forces that brought me to power, figuring out with them, how do we deal with them? How do we disarm the Pentagon? How do we ensure that the corrupt and absolutely repressive police apparatus in the United States is dismantled? How do we imprison all the
Mhm.
spooks and vet them for what function could they play now here in the future, whether they have to like rot in prison or whether they can actually contribute something to
Yeah.
the society. And then it will be a long process of kind of doing what I said about the Palestine situation, right? We probably have to do that
Mhm.
all around the world, since the United States has culpability in the destruction, the impoverishment of the entire world. And hopefully this will probably take many months, if not years. We have a program that begins to put into action a lot of the things that we talk about as a progressive or a radical left, so to speak. So,
Yeah.
dealing with climate catastrophe, dealing with the legacies of war, dealing with the conditions that certain oppressed nationalities and people
Mhm.
across the U.S.'s uh, social and political and economic landscape. So doing that, and hopefully that leads to, that's kind of ambitious, but hopefully that leads to some kind of major change over a realistic period of time. And yeah, I mean, that's a difficult question, JB, but I hope that it answered the question. That's all I can really think of. And it's hard not to be incredibly broad about it, because I feel like a lot of the, other than Palestine, which is everyone is talking about it,
Yeah.
a lot of these issues we could talk probably the whole show about, whether it's domestically or internationally. So I
Yeah.
guess to be as broad as possible and succinct as possible, that's kind of how I would, if I were an individual somehow elected president in this incredibly, um, we say the unipolar world. Well, now people are throwing out the term uniparty, but in this one party system with two wings, in a system that completely excludes anyone who remotely thinks like myself, uh, in an ideal world, or in a world where I did end up coming to power, I guess that's where I would want to put
Yeah.
my particular focus. But of course, it probably won't just be up to me. It'll probably be up to how dire the situation is, how big of the Civil War really is, and
Mhm.
how, you know, uh, how the forces that brought me into power, how they see things, and that would probably be a struggle in and of itself, because certainly, despite the United States' vast wealth stolen from around the world, and of course from working people everywhere, despite that, it has become a system and become a society that doesn't really operate in a way that can offer very much. For example, like, you really have to start from a completely different place to get very
Yeah.
basic things going. For example, like
Exactly.
the fundamental shift politically and economically that it takes to say something like, okay, we'll build 40,000 kilometers of high-speed rail like China has. That takes a completely altered, like, I'm talking like a complete transformation in how just
Yeah.
the fabric of the economy works, because the United States is, I mean, even arguably in its so-called industrial period, wouldn't have been able to do such a thing, right? Like, there would need to be fundamental transformations in how economic development happens, which would inevitably take time. So that in and of itself, I think would be something that would have to be addressed among those who brought me to power. Like, how do we put people to work to do something that really has never been done before?
Well, I'm thinking about your answer, and one of the things that it dawned on me is that, let's say, for instance, yes, you became President Haifong and you are now running the country. I would see probably one of the best type of policy decisions would be in a way of using your office as an activist. Here's the thing. It would be, what do people like myself do when we do actions on the ground, right? Like, for instance, I do the Orlando Mutual Aid chapter from RBN. One of the things that we want to do is we want to feed and clothe people, and then tell them the lesson of worker solidarity, class consciousness, and all that. So basically, feed you and then inform you, right? Because you can't learn on an empty stomach. And in a sense, you'll be doing that. It's like, okay, you can't be a productive citizen if you're homeless. You can't be a productive citizen if you're hungry. You can't be a productive citizen if you don't have adequate education. So it's like we're changing the system from the ground up for people's material benefits so that they can be more productive citizens. And so in doing so, then it says, okay, so we're going to build more high-speed rail than China does, and we're going to beat them at it. We're going to beat China at uh fighting climate change, or we're going to beat them at helping elevate other countries that we have dismantled over the years. So instead of a bringing democracy over there, it's like, no, y'all already got democracy. We're just going to give y'all some money without any strings attached and let y'all do what y'all do. And so it's kind of like, I kind of see it like that. Like if you were a president, if you went in that direction, then I think that people would even be willing to give you a chance if their mind is still in capitalism, but they're like, but he fed us, or he did programs that really, really helped me so that my bank account's no longer in the red. So I don't know. Is that sound any weird to you, or?
Well, it doesn't sound weird. I think one of the questions or maybe many questions, it takes the form of many questions, but something that I do ponder is what kind of political infrastructure would it really take for there to be a leadership that reflects what someone like myself and others, because luckily I'm inspired and pleased that I am not by myself in how I think about the world. Well,
Of course.
not everyone may think exactly how I think. Many people share agreements. Now, I guess the majority of people are starting to have hopes for healthcare and things like that. And also, I would say probably most people would agree that peace is better than war, even if you ask about particular questions, there may be some confusion. So I often ask, what kind of political infrastructure would it take for, even if we were to look at like a Jill Stein, who, Jill Stein, it was a friend. I would say that we share many different views and positions, not 100% probably, but very close. And what would it take for her to gain power? Probably much more than a standard political campaign within the two-party system trying to enter as a third party. What kind of movement would it take for there to be political leadership that threatened to take hold of the highest annals of power in the United States? And this may sound quite radical, but it's probably going to take not just a peaceful movement, but it's probably going to take a large force of people willing to defend that leadership, not just myself, hopefully it's an organization of many people to defend them from repression and to kind of force the issue. Like it will take, I mean, the United States, when I say civil war, like I did earlier, I really meant a class war, and it's probably going to take some kind of violent form at some point. It's not as if violence is not already happening. We've talked about the war machine, but it happens in the United States too. I mean, Columbia University won't even let Jewish Forces for Peace and Students for Justice of Palestine exist right now because they can't handle the fact that the majority of people, a majority of students who have zero relationship with Zionism, want to see a ceasefire and want to see their university take a stand. So that that shows that the repression is already quite stifling, and it's already quite effective in a lot of ways. And so that means we're going to need a pretty powerful political force with capabilities of defending itself. So I don't want to get you in trouble by using the word violence, but it's going to have a lot of weight behind it, where things like police repression, censorship, these kind of things can't derail us. So that's what I always think about, is how do we get to that point where we do have, and it doesn't even have to be it's not like we're talking about a vast majority of people, but we're just talking about a good number of people who are willing to sacrifice, take risks, and be able to build a tight knit kind of organization that can develop the leadership that people can start to begin to trust,
Yeah.
and dare I say, like, become almost like a Hezbollah like organization, like an organization that people really trust. It didn't start
Yeah.
out with a lot of people, but now
Yeah.
Hezbollah is one of the most powerful
Black Panthers.
organizations, political organizations, Black Panthers in the
Yeah.
United States, Hezbollah abroad, forces like that. I mean, these are organizations with incredible amounts of influence. Most any kind of force around the world too, like any nation, even like if we consider, for example, China, like the Communist Party of China, didn't start out. Everyone should watch the movie 1921 if you can, on the formation of the Communist Party of China. I watched it on a plane back from Shanghai. I'm not sure if it's available on streaming services, but if you are able to find it and get it, you should, because it shows how it started out with like a dozen people, trying to escape the in Shanghai, which was basically foreign occupied at that point, Western occupied, trying to escape the repressive Western forces, the collaborators within the Chinese nationalist government. Like, that is how most things start. So how do we get to a point where we start from there and start to build an organization that's able to develop leadership that can then build trust with the people, and then it comes to a head. I mean, that's kind of like a formula that's in my head, but it takes, in this moment, I don't have any answers for how that exactly happens. There are
Yeah.
just moments in history where it does happen, and sometimes we lose and sometimes we win.
Yeah, it's interesting because you just mentioned about organization, and I remember back to a video of Kwame Ture talking about how there's a necessity for every person to be within an organization. For instance, you had Nelson Mandela with the African National Congress, the ANC. You had Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. with the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. You had so many different organizations that were integral to the civil rights era, which ushered in a lot more rights, especially for people of color, particularly Black people, within the United States. Or if you have abroad, Nelson Mandela in South Africa. So it's very important for us to be part of these so that we can come together as an organizational structure in order to be able to change things. So I really want to thank you for that answer as well, because that was a very nuanced answer. I think that a lot of people really should consider.